Today we're going to have a smaller video for the lesson 4, a subsection in the chapter talking about changing the motion of a path. So for that one, it starts on page 122. We're going to look at the motion path.fla file. This has a little spacecraft and a path that it follows. So if we just play that movie, you can see that it's following this green path and going from top down to the bottom. So that's the path that was identified and already created for us. So we can play with this using the selection tool and actually select the path itself. See how it turned a little bit darker green? It's a little bit hard to see the difference, but once we have the path selected, we can move that around. We can move the path, move the icon along with it, and it will change direction. I can transform that just like I can an object. So if I select the free transform tool, I can modify this path and make it go slightly differently. I can reverse the path, have it go from top right to bottom left, and when I play it now, it's going to go backwards. So I can manipulate the path just like I do a normal graphic image. I can also manipulate it using the points. Remember that we can change the various points in a graphic. So I'm going to convert this point here by selecting Convert Anchor Point and change this into a point that's more of an arc, and I can move that around. That's using what they call the Bezier spline system, and I can modify these all day long. I want to make this path completely different, and when I play it now, it's going to follow that curve instead. So I can manipulate the path once it's created. I can add, play with the subsection tool. Somehow this is working very slowly. There we go. So it's now following that same curve that I had created and modified using the pen tools. So I can add points to that path and do all kinds of fun stuff. When I have the path selected, in the properties for the path itself, there's a checkbox that says Orient to Path, and that lets the spaceship orient itself to the path as it's playing. So as I play this one, it changes the rotation of the spaceship to match that path. Unfortunately, my path now is backwards, so let me move it back the way it was before so that it makes a little more sense, and have it play going forward now while it tries to calculate out the new path. So now it's following, and it's keeping the orientation of the icon or the object with the path as it goes along. So that's another option that you can have. Now I can the actual object here could be changed completely. The book has another one in here called the alien, and I can drag the alien on top of here and say replace that between the objects. Yes, I want to replace that. And unfortunately, it puts it way over here in the corner for some reason, and I cannot figure out why it does that. That is the whole path. I'm going to transform that so it's smaller and get it back onto the stage correctly. All right, back onto the stage. So here's my stage, and again, if I play this now, this new object is going to follow the same path. So I can edit these paths again, just like before. I can tell it to not follow that. with the orient to path, and so he just goes up and down, staying in the same orientation that he's at here. So now you can see he's not oriented with the path, he just follows it up and down in the same place. So now let's move on to working with the icon itself and doing nested animations. We can click in the library, let's double click the alien itself, the icon, and now we're inside of a scene and looking at the alien, and I can select little pieces of these aliens and animate each piece separately, which is what the book wants us to do. So we're going to choose, get back to our selection tool, right click on the arm, and we're going to create a motion tween for that, and that moves out and creates a tween for that arm. And we're going to select the free transform tool and rotate this up so that he's going to be flapping his arms. So now as I move back and forth, the tween calculates all of those in-between pieces. I didn't have to move the arm into all of those inner pieces. It just calculates that automatically based on how long I have between the first frame and the last frame. So it takes 24 frames to go from bottom to top like that. So he can have him wave to us. Isn't that cool? Now we're going to create a motion tween for the other arm. So we'll move the playhead back to the beginning, select his arm, right click and say create motion tween. Rotate that guy up again, and now we have both arms flapping. Whee! Isn't that fun? Now we need to insert some frames for the head, body, and feet. So we're down into the last piece here, and we're going to insert frames so that they all stay on the screen at the same time, because you notice that the alien body is in the first frame but not in any subsequent frames. So we want his body to stay there as well. So in the last frame we want to select some frames, and we can hit F5 to insert some frames, and so those are just some static frames. The body's not moving, but the body now stays on the film. You could think of it that way. He's on the film, he's just not doing any motion. So he's flapping his wings. So we exit that, go back to the scene, and now we can play again, and now he's going to flap his arms at the same time while moving on the path. So that's called a nested animation. Isn't that cool? So let's select the alien and go and look at the motion editor. And we have the timeline that we're used to. Let's go to the motion editor, and this lets us look at various pieces of the motion in the various directions. So I have X and Y and Z rotations. I can transform him. I can make him smaller and bigger, for instance, scale him, change some color effects so he becomes transparent or not. All of those let me change various types of animation. So this is just a way of manipulating that information there. So just some basic pieces. We can enlarge and contract this bottom timeline or the motion editors to see different pieces. We can use these open and close arrows to look at inside effects. I can look at this as the viewable frames down here at the bottom, and I can say I want to view more frames or less frames. This is the expanded graph size, so I can make these smaller or bigger, and that only works if I'm selecting one of these. So when I select an actual effect, it makes that one bigger so I can see it. When I select another one, it shrinks that down so I can see the larger skew Y here, for instance, scale, larges. So that's what it expands to. And this is the normal graph size, so I can make these smaller And then when I click on them, it goes to the expanded graph size. So that's just a way to see some of those graphs a little differently. So let's play around with changing some color effects. So that is in the color effect, and I want to add a new color or filter. So we're going to click the plus icon here, and I want to select an alpha. So what this is going to do is change my little alien's transparency. So on the first keyframe, we're going to have a 0 alpha amount. And then on the last keyframe, we're going to change this alpha amount to 100%. So you can see it's like a straight line graph from 0% to 100% in 90 frames. So when I press play on this one, you can see he starts out very dim and comes out fully 100% untransparent. So he starts out completely invisible and becomes visible completely at the end. So this line here is like an object, and we can play on this as well the same way. I can insert keyframes in the middle here. I can select a frame here, and let's say I want to add a keyframe to frame 20. And we can right-click on the line itself and say Add Keyframe, and that lets me have a frame now that changes transparency. This is dealing with the transparency itself. So I can say up to 20, up to frame 20. I want him to go to 50% and then take longer to come all the way to full view. So we play that again, and then he stays, and the effect is longer on these subsequent frames, the last 60 frames. So you can change this, play around with this, much like editing just a normal graphic. I can delete it, bring back the keyframe. I can add a keyframe here and make this go back down. Let's say he's at 50%, and this guy might come up to 50%. I can change these into smooth points so that they are curved. So he's going to come up to 50%, get scared, come back down to 0, and then all the way back up. We want to move this frame back up to 100%, something like that. So I can make these change perspective. So he goes all the way up to 100. By frame 50, comes back and gets afraid, and then comes back again, and the end of the comes all the way up, fades back out, comes back in again. So you can change all kinds of things with the tools, just like you would an object or a graphic. We can always go back and forth between the keyframes. This is a way to navigate between the keyframes. At a particular place in time, I can add a keyframe. All of that is manipulated in this piece here. I can delete, I can reset the values back to the beginning. That will reset all the values back to 100% alpha. I'm going to undo that so I have my transition again. And that's about it. These are called eases, going from a particular point or translation of an object. I can transform the object as well. Let's try a scale. So if I select back here, he's going to be almost transparent, and we'll scale him way down. Then later on we can scale him back up again, add a keyframe. Let's make this bigger so I can see it. Let's add a keyframe here so that I can play with that, drag that around. Make him change from big to small to big again. Let's see what happens with that. So he's actually changing, unfortunately, at the place where we don't see him, he's invisible. So let's move this back, maybe to frame 20, and then we'll go back to 100%. And this is scaling in the X direction. So he gets squishy and he gets fat. So at this point, let's make him go really thin. So he goes from big to thin, and then gets bigger again, back up to normal values. I can scale in the Y direction as well, and insert keyframes as well. So it's the same for any of these effects. I can add that animation, and you see my nested animation still goes along with all of that. So that's all for the motion path. We'll be using this in the car movie advertisement next.